despite the challenges of 2020. Your dedication amidst great uncertainty in the early days of the pandemic kept the city operating in a safe manner and chartered the path for cities that followed. You responded quickly and creatively to help our community, small businesses, and people in need. At the same time, you recognized the historic moment and the need to focus on racial justice, and it started the work ahead towards a more equitable future.
Thank you to the entire community of Kirkland for your ongoing, unrelenting compassion and resilience. This has been very, very hard, and you have continued to amaze and inspire us with your tenacity and willingness to make it better. We are so very proud to serve you.
I would like to call this to order this City Council meeting of April the 20th, 2021. Clerk, will you please call the roll for tonight's meeting?
Councilmember Nixon?
Here.
Councilmember Black?
Here.
Councilmember Curtis?
Here.
Councilmember Falcone?
Here.
Councilmember Pascal?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Arnold?
Here.
Mayor Sweet?
Here. Thank you. Our study session tonight is for a Vision Zero action plan and active transportation update. We expect to reconvene our regular meeting at approximately 7:30. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So tonight we have two separate but very related topics. And what we're looking for from the council tonight is comments and suggestions. And I think you want us to incorporate as we move forward with both of these two projects. So here to walk you through them is Joel Funt, our transportation manager, and Kimberly Scrivener, our transportation planner.
Welcome.
Great. Thank you, City Manager, Mayor Sweet, members of the council. Let me share my screen. Great. So the first topic tonight is about Vision Zero, which is the goal for zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries on our street. What I'm going to do tonight is first to give a little bit of a background, talk about what we're seeing from our crash data, mention some strategies that we're looking at for the action plan, and then talk about some next steps. Feel free to stop me at any time during the presentation. So the Vision Zero concept was created in Sweden in the 90s, and based on their success, has been adopted by cities throughout the world. I'm not going to read the key tenets of Vision Zero to you, but I wanted to show them. This is really the kind of the concept that Sweden identified has been adopted by lots of folks. A couple of things I will mention on the slide, though. One is about language. So you'll see me use terms like crash and collision. The Vision Zero concept tries to stay away from the term accident, and that's because of the first two bullets, that traffic deaths are thought of as being preventable and that street design should anticipate error. So that's some of the reasoning behind the language that you'll hear or won't hear. The other thing I'll mention with this is to talk about the most vulnerable users of the system and what that means. In 2019, the Washington State Legislature passed the Vulnerable Road User Law and defines vulnerable users as pedestrians, and then anybody riding a bike, a personal electric mobility device, a moped, a motorcycle. It even includes people riding a horse or a tractor. But essentially, anytime you're not encased inside a vehicle that would otherwise protect you. The other time I've heard the vulnerable users being used in another way is when relates to vulnerable populations. So people with low income, seniors, folks that may not have a choice of whether to drive or not. And so that's some context about when we talk about the most vulnerable users of the system. Kirkland is already a Vision Zero city. Our goal for zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries by 2035 was adopted in the 2015 Transportation Master Plan. And what I'll mention here is that there essentially there is an emphasis on fatalities and serious injuries. And serious injuries, I got a lot of questions about what that means, is defined by an injury that is life-threatening, that or would result in permanent impairment to your body structure or your organ, or that would require significant medical intervention to prevent permanent damage to your organ system or your body structure. So just wanted to mention that. The other piece I'll note here is the systems approach, where we're looking at our whole system and how everything works together. We'll talk about the other couple things as we move along. So Kirkland, safety has always been how Kirkland does things. We, every CIP project, every program, we are always looking at ways to make our system safer. A couple other things that have happened since 2015 of the adoption of this policy is to create a Vision Zero service team. So that is our interdepartmental team, because in order for us to achieve the Vision Zero goal, it will take a village. We also purchased a Crossroads analytics software. So this is essentially helps us better track the crash data, which is a huge improvement for us. Previous to that, we had a 20-year-old software that required manual entry. So this has saved us a lot of time and energy, and is able to help us better track and analyze this data. You see the map on the side is a web map that is of our crash information. This shows all the fatal and serious crashes by all modes, and then in addition to that, any bicycle and pedestrian related mode. One thing I didn't mention earlier, was that while the goal for zero may seem aspirational, Kirkland does have a history. In between 2001 and 2008, we had a very long stretch without seeing any fatalities. Then again, in 2010 and 2013, their serious injuries has remained somewhat steady. Another example is Oslo is probably one of the most documented success stories of Vision Zero. They went from 41 deaths in the 70s to 18 in the 90s, and in 2019, they had 1 death. So reducing those numbers down does take time, but we have seen that happen in other places. The last thing I'll mention on this slide is that the police department has been participating in the Target Zero task force with the county for 3 years now, I believe. Target Zero is the name of the state's plan with the same goal of zero fatalities and serious injuries. So Kirkland has always been, as I mentioned, safety is just how Kirkland does things. And Kirkland has always been a leader. We were the first city to adopt a complete streets policy, one of the first cities to adopt and bring on our pedestrian flag program. And what I'll mention here is that what we're talking about today with Vision Zero and active transportation, we're talking about implementing the first 3 goals in our transportation master plan. And it's been working. This slide shows how we compare to both our neighbors and some other cities in Washington state with a similar population. But yet there's still more to be done. We still are seeing fatalities and serious injuries here at Kirkland. So my next section of this presentation is to dive in a little further into the data analysis. Before I do that, I just wanted to pause and see if anyone has any comments or questions before I continue on.
Council? Looks like you can proceed, Kim.
Great, thank you. So in Kirkland, 62% of our fatal and serious injuries are bicycle and pedestrian related. I'm going to break this down a little bit more by the fatalities and serious injuries. So in the last 5 years, 2015 and 2019, we've seen 8 total fatalities and 55 serious injuries. One thing I will point out, if you're a number cruncher, this slide shows the information by crash type. And so parked vehicle is a type of crash, pedestrian and bicycle involved is a type of crash, and that information is, that kind of categorization is set at the state, set by the state. The previous slide I showed you is by mode. So when we pull out bikes from pedestrians or motorcycles from motor vehicles, we're really talking about the number of people that were injured. Whereas if we talk about crash type, it's the total number of crashes. So that's why you might see a little bit of a different percentage. I just wanted to clarify that. So this slide I feel is very important to show, and the next couple of slides I'll get into this, is about the vulnerable users of the system in the rate of injury. So 76% of the time when a motor vehicle is involved in a crash, it results in no injury, where only 11% of the time, if a vulnerable user of a system is involved in a crash, results in no injury. And so these other types of injuries, and luckily we're not seeing a lot of fatal injuries, but as you can see, you'll still see the severity here. And a lot of that has to do with speeds. So the lower the speeds, it will increase the likelihood of a person surviving a crash. Now, this slide I like to talk about. This information is not represented in any of the data that I've shown you already. The data I've shown you already is just total numbers. But what we don't often talk about is that people that are out walking and biking only take up 12% of the trips on our streets, but still take up 16% of all serious and fatal injuries if you compare to the total number of crashes. Whereas it's the opposite for motor vehicles, 81% of the time, or people driving take up 81% of the total trips on a road, and then only 2% of the time somebody is injured. So it's another way of looking at the data, similar pattern. The chart on the left is in the Puget Sound region. On the right, it's the state of Washington. And the reason why I'm kind of driving this topic home a little bit is that the suggestion for our Vision Zero action plan is to also include bicycle and pedestrian injuries. So as I mentioned earlier, Vision Zero in general really focuses on serious injuries and fatalities. And this is really a policy question. I'd like to hear your feedback, is that the suggestion, because of the higher number of people walking and biking getting injured in Kirkland, that we would like to also have a more detailed analysis of bicycle and pedestrian related crashes. And we can limit those to injury crashes or all crashes for bike ped. The city of Portland did set some precedent for that, and that's how they have their Vision Zero plan outlined. The other thing that I'll mention is that when we look at the contributing factors in the risk and how to address them, we look at both the characteristic of the roadway and the human element. So in Kirkland, we're seeing a higher percentage, almost 50% of the human element being failure to grant right-of-way to either a person walking or biking or driving. And then following up with that is inattention. DUIs are still kind of on that high list, but they have gone down since we have done this analysis from 2014 to 2018. In terms of the roadway characteristics, we look at speed. The highest percentage in Kirkland are places where we have no traffic control devices. Also roads that have a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit, that's about 60%. And then other intersection related roadway characteristics. So those are some of the ways that we can look at what the contributing factors are and how we might address them, both in general and then specifically to our roadways. Are there any questions about what we're seeing from the data before I move on to how we plan to address them?
Seeing none.
All right, I'm gonna keep moving on here. So the first thing is we look at our high crash corridors and areas, and this is done in a couple ways. First, I just want to point out that this is not an exhaustive list of all of our priority corridors. I just wanted to show you the top one so that you can see the total numbers. I do want to highlight, though, that we have a lot of projects on our books to address these places already. Totem Lake has a whole host of projects, including the Totem Lake Gateway project, which will add a significantly wider sidewalk to access the Cross Kirkland corridor, the Totem Lake Connector. We just received a grant from the state of Washington for local road safety to improve crossings on 124th Street. That same grant was successful with some improvements on Central Way and in downtown. We have the Juanita Drive quick wins. We have the Lakeshore projects on the waterfront. There are a couple major CIP projects that we're looking at adding Kirkland's first protected bike facilities. And so that will be one thing we will make sure to add in this action plan or both what's on the books, adding information about projects that we already have and improvements that we are doing now. And that'll help us narrow down the places we need to focus on. The other thing that I'll mention, and as I said, this is really a policy decision, is to include other bike and pedestrian injuries. As I mentioned before, we can look at injuries, bike and ped injuries to add to our analysis, or we can look at all other bike crashes. I used injuries because that's what Portland did, and that just set some precedent for it. What we did here is broke down the corridors. Since we're looking at more numbers, it allowed us to break our corridors down into smaller chunks. There are different roadway characteristics on different sections of the roadway. So this helps us narrow down and we can zoom in and find little clusters here and there by looking at it this way. It's just another way of doing things. My suggestion for the Vision Zero action plan we would do both. We can have the highest corridors for fatalities and serious injuries. This is how the state likes us to do that for their local road safety plan. As I mentioned, we had a couple successful projects that were funded by that program, and they will look at the serious injuries. And then we can break things down a little bit more detail. Any questions on these before I move on?
Council? Keep going, Kim. I'm sure we're saving them up.
All right. I know that equity is very important to the council. And so as I mentioned, we do want to include the most vulnerable users of our transportation system. And then in terms of our analysis and setting priorities, we can look at these things both geographically and then also what the data tells us in terms of sheer numbers. So high proportion of people of color, people with low income, limited English. That first bullet that I just walked through, that data is not included in the crash data, but we can look at age, schools and seniors. We currently right now, we are not seeing a high rate of seniors or kids getting hit. We do have some that fall into our serious injuries and fatalities, but it's not a high number, and this is something that we'll continue to monitor. Just want to make sure to address how we plan to take a look at equity as we're putting this plan together. So the next couple slides, there are 4 of these, and you have more information about these in your staff report. These are a list of draft objectives and strategies. So improving our crash data is one challenge with working with crash data is that the only data we have now comes through police reports. There are a lot of other crashes that happen on the road, and particularly those are bicycle and pedestrian related that we don't see. There are a couple ways that we can derive additional information. That's partnering with public health agencies, working with a fire department for calls that they get that don't necessarily result in a police report. Bellevue uses the app Waze. So there are a couple of ways that we can see how we can better improve our data and therefore the analysis. We'd also like to improve our information on our website, the information to the public, such as web maps, trends, and this would be something that we would update over time, either annually or every other year. Innovations in technology. So for instance, this could be partnering with the City of Bellevue with their video analytics project. This is where they take their traffic cameras and they try to predict where you're seeing exposure and risk for crashes. So that's one example of improvements in technology. Data before and after a project. This one takes a little bit more time because you want to see how well your project is doing, and that can take a couple years. One example is that we did take before data for our new neighborhood greenways that are coming online. So we'll see if that's improving our crash rates on those corridors in the future. And then the traffic monitoring program, this would be additional counts or ways to count, such as bicycle and pedestrian counters. This could also be taking a look at places where we see people more exposed. And feel free to stop me on any of these. In terms of a culture of safety, so we would like to educate the public, and this is a little less about going out to the public and asking them about crafting these objectives. So we said Kirkland safety is just how we do things here. This is more of taking the opportunity to send messages out to the public to remind them of the importance of safety. This could be information on our website. We could send out existing public service announcements that are created by others, such as the state or King County. For instance, the vulnerable users law that I mentioned, one of the pieces to that is to make sure that you don't follow someone too closely and you give cyclists 3 feet of space when you're passing. That is something that is appropriate for us to share. We can also create our own public service announcements. This could be related to weather or seasonal, that type of thing. I think when it starts getting dark or sunny and everything gets busy. Maintain the culture of safety interdepartmentally. So that's where our service team comes in, and we are constantly reminding each other how important this is. I did mention in the staff report about working with through active construction zones. I want to clarify that our our planners and our development team, they work really hard to make sure that that there's safety through construction zones. And we're not seeing a pattern right now, but sometimes compliance can be challenging. And so just want to say, folks are already really doing a good job. We can improve on that. The traffic safety education in schools, we have a great partnership with the Safe Routes to School Action Plan and with the schools. I'll mention just anecdotally that hopefully we can get back to it because that'll be fun. You probably heard with the Safe Routes to School presentation that the school district and in partnership with us was successful in receiving a grant for a bike trailer. And that includes bikes and a way to haul them around. And Kirkland can borrow that from the school district for our own events. We've also had conversations with the police department about involving the school resource officers to get involved. So we think education will be important and a fun way to make our city safer and engage kids. And then of course, staff training. And I already mentioned that coordination with Bellevue is an example of really learning from each other and making sure that we're up to speed on the most up-to-date and recent improvements on how people are addressing Vision Zero. And then prioritizing safe street design. So potential engineering improvements, and not just engineering improvements, but also seeking innovation in design. We really think we have a lot of opportunity in a lot of places, but in particular at intersections where we are seeing a higher crash rate and more conflicts. And that's also where we have a little bit more space to work with. And some of those could be projects where we take the bike lane all the way to the intersection. That could be more money for a CIP project, and that's really a policy decision. And there are a lot of other really fun, innovative ways to look at how to keep people separate, particularly intersections, but also in general, the separate bicycle and pedestrian modes. I mentioned already, we are working on a couple projects that include Kirkland's first separated protected bike facilities. I shouldn't say first, we have one in Winita with that. But continuing to look at that. And then essentially making sure that we're continuing to find opportunities for capital investments for multimodal facilities. Channelization is also an opportunity. And then operations. So there's a lot of things we could do with signal timing that can improve pedestrian safety. An example of a project is the pedestrian scramble downtown. We can talk about leading pedestrian intervals where you allow the pedestrian to get a head start so they're better visible when somebody makes a turn, even some bike symbols. The prevention of blocking of crosswalks, that's where enforcement comes in, and bike facilities, our school camera program, speed limits. The response team after a crash is something that we also think was a good opportunity to get together and talk about how it happened. Is there an engineering solution? Is this something that's more enforcement? And just really taking a look and having a conversation when we do see an incident here in Kirkland. So this is just kind of a summary in terms of better coordination, monitoring, and then being transparent both to the public and to council. And so with that, before we talk about next steps, I just want to give the opportunity for anyone to provide additional feedback, particularly about the strategies I went through, and I can back up if you'd like.
Is that Councilmember Pascal?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I guess this is the time to kind of provide any input on the Vision Zero before we turn it to active transportation plan. Is that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, just some thoughts that I had, and I think you've addressed you touched on some of them. I think many of you know that that I sit on the Active Transportation Safety Council for the state, and Vision Zero is a prominent subject at our meetings. We talk about it quite frequently, particularly from how we can help encourage other communities across the state from adopting it. There's only a few, I would say, when you look at all the different communities. And there's some things in there that we've been talking about. One of them is safe vehicle speeds. And so I recognize that the plan kind of tees up issues that we will address going forward at some time, right? We're not going to accomplish everything all at once, but it is a plan that identifies things that we might try to tackle or discuss. And some of the things that I've been thinking about are wanting to do a more comprehensive review of our speed limits on arterials throughout the city. I feel like there's some consistency issues when I look at arterials that look the same, feel the same, but have different speed limits. And that's just how things have gone, because we haven't really done that. We've annexed different areas of the city. We haven't necessarily changed speed limits. So it'd be good to do a comprehensive review, something that Shoreline just recently did that I was looking at. Speed limits were set based upon 85th percentile speeds. State RCW has been changed to allow for speed limits to kind of take that Vision Zero approach, considering other factors such as surrounding land uses and the traffic crashes and injuries and fatalities and other things that are now considered that weren't when speed limits were originally set. So that's one thing that I'm not saying that we have to tackle right now, but I would like to tee that up to do that sometime down the road. Another one is a consideration of 20-mile-per-hour speed limits along our residential streets in our neighborhoods. That's a state law that was changed several years ago. I think it would be something to have a conversation about and see if there's interest and desire to do that. I know it's certainly a controversial subject perhaps, but many cities are starting to do that, and reinforces safe speeds in neighborhoods. Another, I'm talking about vehicle speeds. None of these are easy things, mind you. The third one is for school zone speed limits, which are 20 miles per hour. I've been in many communities that actually have those speed limits set all day long from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. rather than having a light that blinks when school's starting and letting out. It's made to reduce confusion and to reinforce the fact that you should always drive slower around schools. Communities such as City of Lakewood have it. Even Sandpoint, Idaho, that I was visiting this winter has school zone speed limits all day. So that'd be something that be good to say something about that if that's something that we could think about. And then you talked about safe street design, and it's really about promoting slower speeds, providing opportunities to walk, bike, and roll. And I'd like us to kind of think about, we used to have this neighborhood traffic control program that basically implemented many of our kind of horizontal deflection type of design measures in our neighborhoods, whether those are chicanes or kind of bulb outs or traffic circles, things like that. We don't do that much. Most of that infrastructure was built 20 years ago. I think it would be good to reevaluate that, and maybe not to the level of what we've done in the past, but to do those low cost, high value type of improvements. So instead of a traffic circle, you put up a candlesticks and you paint the traffic circle. And so you can do that at a much lower cost, but you still get the same benefits, which is slower speeds, reduced collisions, confusion of the four-way kind of local street intersections. And then at the same time, you can look for opportunities to put in a pedestrian bicycle infrastructure. So those are things that I think it would be good to highlight as things to try to accomplish and or outcomes out of this plan. Because I mean, I am a realist. I know that you can't do it all at once, but if it's not in a plan, it's not an adopted plan, we'll never do it. So I'd like to just see those things discussed more in the Vision Zero, and maybe some of them are. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Arnold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, Kimberly. Very thorough presentation. And I think the reason why you didn't get a lot of questions and comments is that you're doing a great job of presenting a lot of information through that will be great to share. A couple of comments. First, on data, I definitely support the Transportation Commission's feedback that the action plan should include strategies from data from other sources than police reports. And I appreciate your suggestions on how we might get that from public health data or fire EMS response. But it's definitely important to get a full picture of injuries. And I also support your look at saying, let's track the data around crashes that the state needs, but let's also track the injury information and use that for prioritization, because there are a couple of corridors there that had some clear impacts that weren't rising to the serious injury level that may inform our investments. So I think that would be helpful. Councilmember Pascal mentioned some things that we can do with paint and bollards. And when I think about safe street design and investments, that sounds expensive and long-term. And I definitely support saying, what are the things that we can do now? I think of these more as interim steps than in replacement of, as you suggested, John, the traffic circle or other things, but it's certainly something we could do immediately and then continue to have the other projects on our CIP list, and we would get to them eventually. But I think there's definitely some quick wins for safety, for dedicated bike lanes and things like that we might be able to do very cheaply through paint dollars and rechannelization, that I would like to look at those opportunities as interim steps. Finally, I really appreciate the idea of the response team. I know that when we've had these incidents in Kirkland, that within the council, there's been a lot of questions that we've gotten answers to internally, where we've asked the sort of things that needed to happen for safety improvements, actions we can take in the future around all those previous fatal crashes. It's great to formalize that and put it into something that could be published for the public to be able to say, here's what happened in this case, here are the things we need to do, and when those things might happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I agree with Deputy Mayor Arnold's comments. Great job, Kim. Great presentation. There was a lot of really informative data and background, so you really helped present this really well and had some great ideas. I'm going to piggyback on some of the comments of Councilor Pascal around school zone safety. You know, as a mom to 3 young kids, this is something that's on my mind a lot. In fact, I believe next fall I'm going to have a child in each of the 3 schools along 84th Avenue up here in Finn Hills. So this is something that is very much on my mind a lot. I first have a question that you may not have the answer to handily right with you, but I'm curious to know, you had that slide that showed the fatality rates by speed. I think it was like 20 miles per hour. And then I forget what the other 2 faster speeds were. Thank you for working to bring that up. Yes, there it is. So even at 20 miles per hour, which is our current, I understand this is a statewide law for school zone speeds, is the 20 miles per hour. 10% is still, to me, a pretty high fatality rate for that speed. So I'm curious to know, do we have data, or are there data available on even lower school zone speeds of, say, 15 miles per hour? I have to say, other places that I've lived, I'm used to seeing 15 miles per hour in school zones. So I was a little bit shocked to see 20 miles per hour when we moved here several years ago. And I'm wondering if that's something that the data do show, that there's an even, that's even safer, or, you know, if it's safer enough that it's worth advocating for. at the state level to change that and have a reduction down to 15 miles per hour. So I'd be curious to see if there are data on that and what they are. Also curious to know, I remember having conversations, this is probably just shortly before the pandemic, about what we can do in the short term to make school zones safer. And there was a discussion about how there's some inconsistencies in the signage, particularly in the annexed area up here in North Kirkland, that we don't have the same school zone signage as other neighborhoods in the city. In particular, I don't remember all the different types of signage, but I do remember discussing like an end school zone signage that I know we don't have up here in around the Finn Hill schools. It's hard for some drivers to know when that school zone ends. So I was curious if we could get an update at some point on what the progress of that was, of getting just consistent signage throughout the city in our school zones, because I think that's something that's of particular importance as our kids start to head back to school. And then I really, really appreciated your slide on the public training, both for the general public and also some of the educational opportunities in schools. I think that's great. I think there's definitely a need in the community for adults to learn more about this as well, and not just with like pushing out information, but with kind of more interactive and engaging training opportunities. This is something I hear from the community a lot, that we hear complaints of, drivers of vehicles saying, oh, the bicyclists never stop at the stop center, they never do this, and bicyclists saying, well, drivers don't pay attention for us and they don't look before they turn right, or whatever those things are. I think there's been some changes, right, over the past couple of years in Washington state law related to bicyclists and drivers and road sharing. So I think it'd be a really valuable tool for the community to have those educational opportunities, because I think it's confusing and it's really nuanced, I think, some of it. And so I think having a good training opportunity for folks in the community would also help add to the safety. So great work, and thanks so much, Kim.
Any further discussion? I'm going to just add a teeny bit. Councilmember Pascal's paint and candlesticks grabbed my brain. I just think it might be an opportunity to try some things like that. I wonder if you ever put anything up like that, if you were to put something temporary up and then put a camera on it, would there be any data that you could gain in terms of changing behaviors and how long it takes to change behaviors? I don't know. And maybe somebody's already done that. The other thing that I grabbed was, Kim, when you talked about the bicycle trailer and the bicycles that are available, I immediately thought about some kind of a festival that potentially we could do this summer, incorporating bicycle patrol or school resource officers, but maybe some kind of an actual training for kids around bicycle safety and the things to pay attention to, and with the various signs like you had in the picture. Anyway, I thought that was pretty exciting. So you want to proceed with your last slide?
Thank you. And this is just to sum up our next steps. So based on your feedback today, I wanted to leave some room to complete any additional analysis that's been requested by council, and to make sure that the action plan includes what you addressed today. By the summer, we'd like to have a draft action plan for your review, to then have sometime in August or September for council approval.
Excellent. Great presentation, Kim.
Thank you. All right.
So, are you going to just drive us right into active transportation?
I can.
Okay.
And I will. All right. Next step. So what I'll mention here to start off with is that our overarching goal is to get more people out by walking and biking. And that is by making it feel safe, comfortable, and convenient. And one of the things that we're thinking a lot about is, and we hear from the community all the time, is that if just a part of the trip is safe, but then there might be a segment in your trip that is harrowing or scary, somebody may choose not to walk or bike for that particular trip, or they may choose that they don't want to bring their kid or their family member with them on a trip that may include even just a short segment that doesn't feel safe. The other thing about encouraging more people out walking and biking is we have a healthier community. So the work getting more people out walking and biking, the CDC has a call for, it's called a call for walkability. And that recognizes that people don't often have time to go to the gym or make themselves healthy in other ways that are more traditional. But well, actually, I could argue that walking and biking is probably the most traditional way of getting more exercise, and it's also more accessible to people. So just want to mention that we'd really like to focus on getting more people out, making it safe and comfortable and convenient and connected. So I do have about 16 slides of substance, not including my transition slides, to give you an idea how long this is. Let's start with the background, talk about the coordination and outreach that we've done so far, get some feedback from a policy direction from you. This presentation does not include a set of draft objectives and strategies because we really want to make sure we're getting direction from you before we craft those. And then we'll talk a little bit about timing. So we have, the last time we updated our active transportation plan was in 2009. And then subsequent to that, the goals were incorporated into our 2015 transportation master plan. From 2009, we included, for instance, developing of the Cross-Kirkland corridor, adding more facilities for pedestrians, increasing the number of children who use active transportation to and from school. I won't read them all, but when the 2015 master plan, transportation master plan was adopted, it took those goals and made them more simple and a little bit longer, but it's essentially safe networks, removing barriers, make walking and biking more intuitive. That includes wayfinding. We have, and then interconnect facilities that are safer and addressing people of all ages and abilities. So when we talk about walking and improving the walking environment for people, we're talking about lighting and safe crossings of the street and getting to the bus stop. And I mentioned wayfinding, finding creative ways to, that we just discussed, to have low cost improvements, and also finding ways to make sure we're accommodating people of all abilities as well as ages. So even looking at innovations and pavement markings so that people that cannot see and can navigate around. Kirkland has made quite a lot of progress. For instance, I just mentioned the Cross-Kirkland corridor and the connections that are going to be underway pretty soon. You're going to be able to bike all the way to the Burke-Gilman and the Sammamish River Trail, which will be so exciting. We've made huge progress with, I think we have about 60 RFBs in the city now. I don't have the data compared to other cities, but Kirkland is head of the game on that one. We've done an analysis of low light intersections, and about 50 lights have been installed at crossings on high volume streets, done a lot of improvements with our curb ramps. So, and yet there's still so much more to do, but we've made good progress. In terms of bicycling, we plan to include a network. The analysis is to look at how well our existing plan network that was adopted in 2009 and then incorporated into the 2015 master plan, and make sure that still works and provides us with a connected network that is low stress. I mentioned before in the Vision Zero action plan strategies about lighting and intersection design. We do have over 60, about 70% of our planned bicycle network is complete. We've widened more or put buffers on a lot of our bike lanes. You've seen the green lines. We have developed a neighborhood greenways guide, and we will have our first 2 greenways this summer. Speaking of activities, I hope you look forward to an invitation from me to go on a bike ride or a walk on our new greenways once they are ready. We have a bike rack, a practice transit bike rack at our Kirkland Transit Center so that people can practice putting their bike on the bus. Again, I can go on and on about the things that we've done, and yet there's still so much more to do. But just kind of wanted to note that we're looking at comprehensively about the whole system. Before I move on to coordination and what we've done so far in our outreach, are there any comments or questions about the kind of the background and where we are right now?
Looks like we're fine.
Great. So we started this process at the same time, pretty much in parallel as the development of the Safer Routes to School action plans. Kari Page and I worked very, very closely to coordinate on our outreach, on the analysis that we're doing in terms of the prioritization measures. We spent a lot of time making sure our data was updated and we evaluated what we're tracking. And so when we get into these plans our data that we're using for our analysis is sound. We also coordinated with the development of the sustainability master plan through the neighborhood planning process and also through our neighborhood safety program. The safe and active transportation umbrella was a term that we came up with to try to address all 3 of these plans under one umbrella, because there's so much overlap with walking and biking with all of this other work that we're doing. We had done Walk and Bike School Month. This was in 2019, of course. We had a community meeting at City Hall. We did participate in the Sustainability Master Plan Summit. There was kind of an active transportation and school section. And I'll talk about the survey that we did in a minute. We had scheduled a safe and active transportation summit scheduled for March 28, 2020, along with going back to all of the rest of the community neighborhood associations that we weren't able to get to earlier than that. And as you all know, that has been canceled. The Safe Routes to School action plans went forward. And in fact, it was last April, I believe, was your study session that we were planning on coming to you with this plan as well. And so it's exciting to be back or to be finally be talking with you about this. I will mention our survey. It went out between October 2019, January of 2020. We received over 1,000 responses, which I have to say, I think it beat the dog park survey, which at that point was one of our highest. Sorry, I had to be a little competitive with that. So we were excited about the turnout. And this, as I mentioned, it was in coordination with questions about walking and bicycling, as well as about school access. And I just have a couple little tidbits for you. I can always bring back more, and we will have an appendix to this plan that will include all of the survey results. But people were interested in being outdoors more and walking and biking for exercise. A little less interest in just the need for for people that need to walk and bike, but it does look like there are enough people that filled out this survey that don't have access to a car. They're really trying to minimize their expense. We asked questions about their social reasons that would impact their decision to walk more or bike more. We also asked about infrastructure as well. I chose these slides because the answer was kind of the same. The biggest response we received is the personal safety from other roadway users. And it is kind of also interesting that what people said about having to carry groceries or children and the convenience of driving, but these are the people that were interested in walking more. I don't have the data today, but another way of dicing this is the people that said they're not interested in what those reasons were. But we want to encourage people that are interested but wary. The same results for those interested in biking more. Again, the highest answer, I guess, is the personal safety from other roadway users. So that's a little bit about our coordination and outreach so far. The other thing that I'll mention is that we did hire, we got as far in our analysis to, we hired a consultant tool design group to help us with the analysis. We do have an outline. Some of our analysis is about halfway through, that really mostly looked at what our existing conditions look like. And then the active transportation plan was put on hold. And so at this point, what we'd like to do is get some direction from you about policy. I'll talk a little bit about what the analysis that we've done, and then we'll, based on council direction, continue this work that we started last year. So in terms of plan elements, we'll have the background and existing conditions, updated goals and actions, and then a draft bicycle network and pedestrian areas. I'll talk about those a little bit. And then also an implementation plan that outlines how we prioritize projects and then how we get them built. And I'll talk about that a little as well. The other piece is a design guidance document where and it's not guidelines. We don't want to have to come back to council if something improves and we want to do something even more innovative than what we have in our guidance document. But it will help us with communicating with our CIP engineers and the contractors they hire and all of the many folks that are building out our city, and so that we can be consistent across the boards and across with a lot of people working on it, how we're addressing intersections. A couple of the things I'm kind of interested in looking at a little bit more are if we have more protected bike facilities, for instance, how we might transition between a regular bike facility and then a protected one and then back out into the street. So as we use more creative, innovative design, kind of looking at what those are and then also looking at how they transition is something that we decided we would like to have. In terms of the policy direction, and really want to hear from you, the goal here is to design for people of all ages and abilities. And that the proposal here is that the plan would focus on access to transit, access to activity centers, and then keeping consistent with the 10-minute neighborhoods. It's part of our comprehensive planning process, and connections to the cross Kirkland corridor, which in and of itself does provide access to transit as people can connect up to Totem Lake and then down to the South Kirkland Park and Ride. And then look at other prioritization measures, so equity, and then the overlap with our other plans. So for instance, we may have crossings or sidewalks that have a certain priority level in our Safer Routes to School action plans. But then as we overlay them on top of the work we're doing for general connectivity for walking and biking everywhere, is that some projects may show more overlap and start to kind of help us trickle to the top. And this is where the update to our transportation master plan comes in eventually. But I'm going to pause here to see if anyone has comments on this proposed policy direction.
Councilmember Pascal.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, just a couple thoughts on the policy. These are these are for both pedestrian and bicycle facilities, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that I was interested in with the access to activity centers, I'm just wondering if we should be thinking about parks too, as access to parks somehow, because I know that those are big generators of pedestrian and bicycle activity, and particularly for our younger populations who probably tend to more go to parks than perhaps a commercial district. But I think both are important, obviously. I just would like to see parks there, and I'm sure you've considered that. I'm just not sure where that fits in. Is that one that you were thinking about too?
That was one I was curious if council would bring up today.
Oh.
We are trying to prioritize as much as possible, but perhaps that just comes out in the prioritization framework, and we can add parks to what we're evaluating the connections to. I was very curious of what council was going to say about parks today.
Yeah, and then one other one that I've been thinking about, and I don't know what to call it, but I want to somehow call out the sizable islands. I'll refer to them as islands in the city where there is absolutely no way to, there's no safe way to walk or bike to or from. Like in the when it comes to healthy food and stuff, they're called like food deserts. And in here, it's kind of like a walk and bike. There's just no way to get there. And so what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about all the folks that live along Juanita Drive or Holmes Point Drive area. Now you can maybe walk within your little community there, but there's really no safe way for people of all ages or abilities to actually get to anywhere else in the city. And that's a very distinct thing, because when I think about the city, I think about where I live. I could walk or bike pretty much anywhere in the city today from Juanita. I'd maybe have to go a roundabout way, perhaps, to kind of stay on a dedicated facility or sidewalk, but I could get all the way to bridle trails if I wanted to. I can't get up to Finn Hill. I can't. There is no way that's safe, except for perhaps a northbound the uphill bike lane on Juanita Drive, but that's still not only the kind of the hardy bikers will use that, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know how to reconcile that, but I think it's a kind of something that would be nice to somehow kind of call out, because otherwise that connection doesn't show up that often in some of the maps that I've seen so far that you presented to the Transportation Commission. So it's an idea that I have, and I've never really been able to crack it, but that was kind of my idea.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Arnold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Kim, I'm glad you mentioned connections to transit activity centers and such. It's going to be an ongoing conversation for many topics that we're talking about on council. It's going to be part of the 85th station area plan. It's going to come up later tonight in the Moss Bay and Everest plan. How do we connect these different transit centers and activity centers? And having active transportation be able to do that is going to be important. As we think about this, I would like to think about the next level of biking, and not just saying, okay, we have done biking and that's wheeled transportation and that's it. There's a couple of nuances that may have differences that are worth thinking about. I'm seeing a prevalence, a lot more of e-bikes. So if we have electric assist bikes around, what does that mean for our biking infrastructure? And I don't know. I'm just curious. This may be something we need to think about. We've had a conversation previously about bike share. I think bike share is going to be important for these last mile connections and will be an important should be an important part of this active transportation plan. I also hope as a council we'll have another discussion around scooters, and certainly as we're thinking about how we walk, bike, and roll around our city, I certainly don't want anything in our active transportation plan that would prevent scooters once we get to a way to be able to go do scooter shares. A number of our neighboring cities are taking a second shot at this. I hope we do too. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I echo Deputy Mayor Arnold's comments about being really happy to see access to public transit in here. I think he mentioned being able to get from transit hub to transit hub. I'd like to add to that, really focusing on being able to have connection from residential areas to public transportation as well. I think that's a huge priority. In particular, it's an equity issue. It's a social justice issue, you know, for folks to be able to have access to transportation, especially as we talk more about affordable housing, and we may have more folks who don't have access to motorized vehicles in our community, who may not have access to bicycles, who may not have other, who might just be being able to walk to public transportation. I think that should be a high priority for us to be able to provide safe infrastructure for them to be able to walk to the bus stop. I also wonder, I thought that was an interesting comment you made, Deputy Mayor Arnold, about e-bikes. I also wonder, I'm not at all an expert in this, but I do have 3 rollerbladers in my family. We're a rollerblading family. So I wonder with that too, because I know there are times where, you know, there's only certain places that are, you know, accommodating to rollerbladers versus bicyclers. And I don't understand those nuances, but I think that's something to consider as well, that hopefully we'll see more of that as part of active transportation. I also really appreciated Councilmember Pascal's comments about parks and recreation being part of this process as well. I think about that as we're talking about walking, biking, and rolling, you know, making sure that, you know, I know it's a value that we've had for so long in our parks in particular, not just being, you know, ADA compliant, but being truly inclusive. And I think that this is an opportunity for overlap here with, I think of, you know, recreational spaces and I don't know, maybe some places in parks where there's only steps, for example, where you can get up and down, and there might be, I'm not going to use the right terminology, but like the thing where you can roll your bike next to you on the stairs, right? Like there's like a track for that. But what about folks who use a wheelchair in our community, right? How do they get around, and having those considerations? I think that all of that needs to be prioritized as part of both transportation, but also where it intersects with recreation as well. In particular, since you mentioned in the survey that's, you know, of the folks who at least filled out the survey, recreation is such a huge part of why they bike. And I wonder too about, you know, the demographics of the folks who completed the survey and any sort of, you know, non-response bias that might be part of those results there, that there might be the people who are more likely to need to use this infrastructure for transportation because they don't have access to a car, if they were less likely to respond to the survey as well. So I kind of take that with a grain of salt, those results. And there may be more folks in our community who don't have access to a car, and that's their reason for walking and biking, but perhaps just we didn't have as many responses from them in the survey of that population. But yeah, I think this is a great conversation that I'm looking forward to hearing more about this and moving forward with this more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any further discussion? Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought I put my name down. Thank you, Kim. Both your presentations have been excellent tonight and really informative, so I appreciate it. Couple thoughts on the connections. When you talk about activity centers, you're talking about business centers. So I live in Houghton, the Houghton Business Center. But I'm also thinking about the connections to employment centers. So if I live in Houghton and I need to get to Evergreen to go to work, how do I get there? So I would add that. And when I think I love that we're talking about connections to the Cross-Kirkland corridor, and I love being on the Cross-Kirkland corridor. It is oversubscribed. We've got e-bikes and we've got rollerblades and so forth. So I think it's time that we need to take another look at our Cross-Kirkland corridor master plan and determine how it's serving our needs and possible improvements we need to make. Because we are pushing a lot of traffic on that. And then when we talk about equity, I want to make sure, Councilmember Pascal used a term today that I just wrote it down. It's hardy bike riders. We're talking about providing active transportation for all ages and abilities. And I want to make sure that we're clear on gender equity too. And for example, I wanted to ride to Juanita Beach this weekend. It's a sunny afternoon. I knew Lake Washington Boulevard was going to be busy. So I decided to take the Crosslook and Kirkland corridor up to Forbes Creek and then work my way down that way, because I, as a bike rider who has an e-bike, so I have the power to get out of a sticky situation, was not comfortable being on Lake Washington Boulevard. So I took a look at the Transportation Commission packet that gave me a better understanding of level of traffic stress, and I would project that a majority, if we want to create a system so more people are adopting active transportation, we need to take into consideration their level of traffic stress. We know that women are encroached on more than women bike riders are encroached on more than male bike riders. We know that women are less likely to ride their bike as opposed to the hardy bike rider that Councilmember Pascal talked about. So when I was looking at the transportation package, a good majority of our roads are identified as level 2, which says that 60% of the people are comfortable riding on that. I question that interpretation, and I wonder whether we need to look at that. For example, on my e-bike, I can ride up 68 on the hill, which is a LTS2, except that I don't feel safe doing it. So I feel like we need to look at those again and make sure that we are truly building a system for all ages and abilities. I'm gonna check my notes real quick. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment? Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One thing, I didn't check my notes, as Councilmember Curtis did. I forgot to just say, I want to really strongly echo what Councilmember Pascal said about like a active transportation desert. Being a Finn Hill resident, this is something that we live. I know that we've been a lot of improvements since we moved here, and so I'm glad to see that. But that's something that's a real issue, among Finn Hill residents, that we're not connected, for example, to the Cross-Kirkland corridor, or even to get down the hill safely. And I know we're working on this, but I think that's something we just need to continue to focus on, because there's a huge need there. There's school kids who go to Juanita Elementary who don't have a safe way to get down the hill, right? There's those of us who would love to be able to avoid using cars and go to the grocery store, but there's not a safe way to go there, so it's getting to the bus stop, it's getting to the grocery store, it's going to our friends and neighbors' houses, it's getting to and from school. So there's definitely a huge drought or desert up here, up in the Finn Hill neighborhood in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I'm just going to add one comment, I think this has been a brilliant discussion. But when I look at it, I can't help but recognize that as we continue to grow appropriately and in the appropriate places, this is going to get harder and harder. And I think it might be timely for us to incorporate some of this discussion into our discussion in April as we look at the rescue funds that are coming our way. This is going to be an increasingly important element of our transportation system. We're going to rely on transitioning a fair number of people to bikes and walking and alternatives. And I think we're just going to have to pay serious attention to this as we move forward. And in our planning for both, particularly for the station area plan. Councilmember Pascal.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree. It's been a great discussion, great presentation. I'm assuming you might have more slides, but I just want to keep going a little bit on a few things that I didn't check my notes, actually. I had a couple more things. You mentioned design guidance in one of the previous slides. I think that's really important, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And that it's not like a council-driven thing, that you can change design as new things emerge, right? Things are rapidly evolving, and you see that with some of the different treatments that are being initiated across the city, but in other cities as well. So I think that's really important. I really would like to see the bike plan with the level of stress kind of helping indicate it, but really, how do we implement more protected bicycle facilities? And the protected bicycle facilities don't have to be the really kind of expensive kind that we're building on 100th or 124th Avenue corridors, where you're, basically constructing multi-million-dollar things. So, I think that hopefully that design guidance can provide some of that, but then you can take it and apply it to where maybe we could help improve that level of stress. And I totally agree with Councilmember Curtis on kind of maybe just recalibrating some of those maps I've seen at the commission level, because I was noticing that Juanita Drive, for example, was lower stress than Waverly Way. And I was like, I'd let my kids bike along Waverly Way, but I'm not on Juanita Drive. So those are just things that I think we can look at, because that's really going to inform where our priorities lie. Thank you.
All right. Should I keep going? Just a couple more slides. Mayor Sweet, or is it?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you.
I was muted.
Okay. We do see that there are a couple places where we can look at the policy updates. So as I mentioned before a couple times, and even with Vision Zero, that data collection be great. Really better understanding how well we're doing. Are more people actually out walking and biking? For instance, we've been talking a lot about connected networks, and I'll talk a little bit more about how some of the analysis will address that. But it sounds like folks are really interested in making sure that that we're connected. I won't talk about the things that we've mentioned before. The bike parking piece is something that it would be nice to look at. For instance, our current zoning could be improved in terms of the bike parking recommendations are currently tied to the number of parking stalls. And perhaps we can decouple that. That's just a suggestion, and we can bring that back or please give me some of your thoughts today. We've talked a lot about the low cost enhancements and then maintenance as well. As we build more green lanes or we buffer more bike lanes, if we separate out, making sure that we're able to maintain the facilities that we have and that we're adding. And so these are some of the areas we're hoping to take a closer look at, find some improvements. And then I can get into the analysis. This was one other place I wanted to pause a little bit, and then I have a couple more slides to really dive in to the analysis that we're doing. This is one other place I wanted to pause for a second. If anybody has anything else.
Council? I don't see anybody, Kim.
Okay. So the analysis that we're looking at for our bicycle network is looking at level of traffic stress. So that would be the presence and quality of the bike facility, the number of lane, speed limits, traffic. And then a follow-up to that is looking at the connectivity. So that's really taking between a certain number of census blocks and unbroken low stress connections between places. And what this will do is highlight places where you can not connect via a safe facility, or you would have to go pretty far away from a direct route in order to find a network that's comfortable and convenient. I will echo, and some of you may have heard this already, but the Transportation Commission also did mention that they kind of also, similar to what Councilmember Curtis said, that the level of stress on certain roads didn't feel like we had a level of stress of 2 or a 1. Is that really the right number? And so we'll go back and talk with our consultants about how to better address our existing network and adjust that level of stress so that it really reflects what people are experiencing out on the ground. Actually, before I move on from this, the other thing I'll mention is that in our current transportation master plan, there is a goal for a network of neighborhood greenways. This is another place I feel is a really good opportunity for Kirkland. They're not necessarily really low cost, but in terms of the length of facility, or in kind of the bang for your buck, if you will, we do see a lot of opportunity. And so there are a couple places that we're looking to improve that network. We had a really interesting conversation with the Transportation Commission about, for instance, Market Street, where there could be a kind of a west of Market wiggle that might be more appropriate for people of all ages and abilities, or we look at trade-offs on Market, which is really a kind of a workhorse street that includes transit and parking, and so it was a really interesting conversation with them about that. And there are a couple other corridors I think we're going to have some really interesting conversations about the investments on those places. So I just wanted to mention the greenways, and then the level of stress that was mentioned by the Transportation Commission, and then Market as an example of kind of how that conversation was really interesting. And then in terms of the pedestrian network analysis, so for the safer routes to school, obviously was looking at school connectivity. And we are also looking at our gaps in our arterial and collector system. And this is another way of looking at gaps that connect the neighborhoods to activity centers. We can add job centers to that, where essentially it takes out, we take a look at how far somebody could walk using a safe facility and crosswalks. The areas that you don't see any color, so those green parcels, those are places that where people are unable to use a sidewalk and a crosswalk to get to that activity center within a mile. And so this can help us identify other local neighborhood streets where we can begin to fill in our network. And then lastly, I'll mention that we've already done this work by our transportation engineers, have identified crossings that need improvement based on crash history, speed, and volume. This is another area where we can look closer at the crossings of that are in our Safer Routes to School action plans, and see where we see overlap and priorities. There are a couple up here on that were recently funded, and so we'll have to kind of address which ones that we have received grant funds for, also down in downtown. And so this is just another piece of looking at additional crossings. So those are some example of the analysis. It sounds like the council is going to be really interested in diving into those details a bit more when we come back to you. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to keep going. I'm pretty much done. In terms of implementation, we had talked already about priorities. We do have in our scope of work with our consultant to identify some cost estimates for high priority projects. We can look at incremental increases to some of our current programs, like the paving program and the striping program, as opportunities. I had already talked about the coordination with Safe Routes to School and Vision Zero, and essentially through grants, through our CIP, through our existing programs, however we can try to implement this, we'll take a look and come up with some estimates and an incremental plan over time for how that might play out in terms of our implementation plan. And so in the next step slide is just the timing. Hope to have a final draft network for the bike recommendations and for pedestrian networks by the summertime. Want to make sure we have enough time for also with the overlap of Vision Zero, and then bring this draft plan back to you in the fall, and hopefully by November, if there's a council is interested in seeing the analysis, we can come back and share with you the detail a little bit more often. And I'll just mention, once we finalize a draft network, we'll want to begin our community engagement again, which was stalled last year. So that is my last slide. We're running low on time, so I just wanted to finish up. Please let me know if you have any other comments or questions.
Council. Kim, that was a fabulous report. Oh, Councilmember Pascal.
Sorry, I was late because I want to make sure give other council members a chance, since I feel like I've talked a few times now. Just one other item. I was wondering if the plan is going to arrive at like high priority needs and then kind of capture that as like what it would take to address the high priorities, whether that's pedestrian or bicycle, just so that we have an idea of what it's going to take to really tackle those.
Yeah.
Is that something that's going to be part of the plan?
Yes, and that's where some of the priorities come in that you all weighed in on, is we are going to have to prioritize, and so that'll be in the kind of the prioritization measures and also the overlap with some of our other plans.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Well, Kim, again, that was incredibly well done. You're going to have to go take some medicine to make sure you don't get hoarse. That was a lot of talking.
My water right here. Yes.
There you go. Well, thank you so very much.
Thank
well
you.
Done. And I think with that, we will take adjourn for now and return at 7:30 for our regular meeting.
Great.
Thank you. We are back in session following a study session for a Vision Zero action plan and active transportation update. Before I move on to item number 4 on the agenda, I would like to read a statement on behalf of the City Council. Today, the jury in the trial of Derek Chauvin found the former Minneapolis police officer guilty of murder and manslaughter charges in the death of George Floyd. We share in the relief felt around the country that justice has been served. The death of George Floyd is horrifyingly only one example of far too many deaths of Black and brown people by some members of law enforcement around the country. Generations of people have been impacted by fear, injury, and death caused by those who don't fulfill the charge of protecting human life. We are well aware that what happened in Minneapolis or anywhere in the country casts a shadow on all law enforcement. The men and women of the Kirkland Police Department have shown honor, understanding, and empathy as we face enormously complex and difficult issues with our community. We heard from our community through last year's protests and gatherings that change is needed. We are grateful for the honesty, candidness, and courage with which so many are sharing their perspectives and insights. Today marks a pivotal moment when we saw that our country can do better. It's a turning point. We must continue to work together to end structural and institutional racism in order to stop history from repeating. Thank you. That takes us to item number 4 on our agenda, honors and proclamations. And we're going to start out with our annual Earth Month proclamation, which will be delivered by Councilmember Neil Black, City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. As you all know, April 22nd is Earth Day. It'll be the 51st celebration of Earth Day. And at this moment, we've now expanded April, as the entire month of April, as Earth Month in Kirkland, Washington. And the memo that's included in the council packet has many links to actions that the city has taken to protect the environment and also opportunities for people to be involved. So with that, we'll be proclaiming April 2021 as Earth Month in Kirkland, Washington.
Thanks, City Manager. So I'm going to read a proclamation of the City of Kirkland proclaiming April 2021 as Earth Month in Kirkland. Whereas the City of Kirkland has a long-standing dedication to protecting and enhancing its natural environment. And whereas an adopted City of Kirkland City Council goal is to protect our natural environment through sustainable goals and practices to equitably meet the needs of all community members for a healthy environment without compromising the needs of future generations. And whereas Earth Month is a reminder that communities and individuals can make a positive impact to reduce energy use, produce or purchase clean renewable energy to mitigate climate change and reduce environmental impacts. And whereas Kirkland residents continually show commitment to the environment by reducing waste, recycling, composting, preventing water pollution, advocating for the environment, utilizing active transportation, and volunteering to restore natural areas. And information about participating in these programs and other environmental efforts may be found on our website. And whereas numerous city programs across departments work to protect the environment, ranging from the Urban Forest Strategic Management Plan, special recycling events and waste reduction efforts, protection of the city creeks, wetlands, and lakes, the Green Kirkland Partnerships, natural parkland restoration events, and more. And whereas the City of Kirkland is active in regional environmental efforts like the EnviroStars Green Business Program, Lake Washington, Cedar, Sammamish Watershed Salmon Recovery Council, and the King County Cities Climate Collaborative, K4C, to reduce carbon emissions, environmental impacts, and improve sustainable behavior. And whereas the City of Kirkland has adopted a citywide sustainability master plan to help coordinate all efforts and implement new actions and goals that will protect, mitigate, and enhance the environment to ensure that current and future generations of the Kirkland community are able to meet their needs. And whereas Kirkland will continue to work towards solutions to climate change and seek strategies to protect the environment for all future generations. Now, therefore, Penny Sweet, Mayor of Kirkland, does hereby proclaim April 2021 as Earth Month in Kirkland, Washington, and calls upon all community members to take action to reduce their impact on the environment.
Thank you, Councilmember Black. David Barnes, our Sustainability Master, is joining us tonight to accept the proclamation. David, do you have some words for us?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Councilmember Black and Council. I accept this Earth Month proclamation on behalf of the city staff and the community who work so hard to make sure we have a healthy and resilient environment. Over the years, we've learned so much about how our efforts can contribute to a sustainable Kirkland, and that the entire community has an important role to play in ensuring our success, both now and in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. This takes us to item B on the agenda, Stand Against Racism Proclamation. Councilmember Amy Falcone will read the proclamation and City Manager will introduce it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Stand Against Racism is a signature campaign of the YWCA USA to build community among those who work for racial justice and to raise awareness about the negative impact of institutional and structural racism in our communities. This year's nationwide theme is From Declarations to Change, Addressing Racism as a Public Health Crisis. There's more information that can be found on the website standagainstracism.org. And our local YWCA Seattle King County invites the community to participate in a Stand Against Racism Town Hall on April 30th, 2020. And more information can be found on our website. So tonight we'll be proclaiming April 22nd to 25th as YWCA's Stand Against Racism Weekend.
Thank you. And I believe Leslie Miller is here to accept the proclamation.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Amy.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, City Manager. I'll be reading a proclamation of the City of Kirkland proclaiming April 22nd through 25th as YWCA Stand Against Racism Weekend in Kirkland, Washington. Whereas all residents, regardless of race, creed, or ethnicity, deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, compassion, and justice. And whereas on February 21st, 2017, the City of Kirkland adopted Resolution R 5240, declaring Kirkland as a safe, inclusive, and welcoming city for all people. And whereas on August 4th, 2020, the City of Kirkland adopted Resolution R 5434, affirming that Black Lives Matter and approving the framework for Kirkland to become a safe, inclusive, and welcoming community through actions to improve the safety and respect of Black people in Kirkland and end structural racism by partnering with those most affected. And whereas on March 16th, 2021, the City Council issued a statement condemning recent and continuing acts of violence against Asian Americans across the country and reaffirming that racism in any form and against any group has no place in Kirkland. And this statement is available on the city's website, along with other resources curated to support the safety of our Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And whereas the Kirkland community values initiatives that will end race-based disparities and make the world a more equitable, inclusive, and dignified place for all to live. And whereas the elimination of racism can be achieved only with the participation of all community members in dialogue, reflection, and action. And whereas the City of Kirkland supports the YWCA's mission to eliminate racial inequalities in employment, education, healthcare, housing, human services, and other areas that affect quality of life. And whereas April 22nd through 25th, 2021, marks the occasion of the annual Stand Against Racism Weekend, a signature campaign of YWCA designated to build community among those who work for racial justice and to raise awareness about the negative impacts of institutional and structural racism. And whereas this year's national campaign urges communities both to move beyond declarations and focus on change, and to recognize that racism is a public health crisis. Now, therefore, Penny Sweet, Mayor of Kirkland, hereby proclaims April 22nd through 25th, 2021 as YWCA Stand Against Racism Weekend in our city, and encourages residents, local businesses, educators, and community and faith-based organizations to advocate for the elimination of structural and institutional racism.
Leslie, did you have some words for us?
Yes, thank you. I am pleased to be able to accept this on behalf of the YWCA and want to say thank you to the council and city leadership for all they're doing to address racism, and just want to highlight the theme of public health as the theme that when we think about racism and a lot of our health determinants, that it's not about individuals, but it's really about racism that shapes the disparate health outcomes that we see in our community. And that has been reflected in the tragic number of deaths during the COVID pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. That takes us to our final proclamation of the day, the Records and Information Month proclamation, which will be read by our Master of Public Information Access, Councilmember Nixon. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So we'll be proclaiming April as Records and Information Management Month. Public records requests and proper records management are an integral part of a well-functioning and transparent government. And this has gone on since 1995, when the Association of Information Management Professionals designated April as Records and Information Management Month in appreciation of the importance of records and information management. And to receive it is our own award-winning City Clerk, Kathy Anderson.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor, for this opportunity. A proclamation of the City of Kirkland proclaiming April 2021 as Records and Information Management Month in Kirkland. Whereas the City of Kirkland's records are valuable assets essential to the effective operation of city government and held as a public trust, critical to protecting the rights and interests of the constituents of the City of Kirkland. And whereas the management of public records, information, and data is critical to every government agency for effective and efficient operations and in support of an open, transparent, and accountable government. And whereas the management of public records, information, and data is critical to every individual for protecting rights and privacy, to every business and organization for ensuring compliance and profitability, and to every government agency for serving the best interests of those within its jurisdiction. And whereas technologies for creating and storing records, information, and data continue to expand the amounts of information that can be created and acquired. And whereas professional control and governance of records, information, and data is necessary for the effective operation of modern government, as well as the reduction of risk, liability, and associated costs and compliance with global standards and practices. And whereas the Kirkland community experiences high quality public services supported by the important role and functions provided by records and information management professionals. And whereas the city of Kirkland has been recognized with national and state awards for the successes of the highly trained and dedicated employees entrusted with responsibility for the careful management, disposition, and provision of access to public records on behalf of the constituents of the city of Kirkland. Now, therefore, Penny Sweet, Mayor of Kirkland, on behalf of the Kirkland City Council, proclaims April 2021 as Records and Information Management Month. And with this proclamation extends our gratitude and thanks to the Records and Information Management team of the City of Kirkland.
Thank you, Councilmember Nixon. Ms. Anderson, did you have some words?
I do. I'd like to thank the council for the recognition on behalf of city staff who manage and produce the city's official records. We hope we are serving the transparency goals of the city and the city council and also the public interest. So we appreciate your appreciation.
Thank you very much. Okay, this takes us to item number 5, communications. We have no announcements, so we go to item B, items from the audience. This is the time in our meeting when we normally hear from the public on matters which are not quasi-judicial or scheduled for a public hearing, of which there are none scheduled this evening. Because of the current social distancing requirements related to COVID-19, members of the public cannot participate in person at tonight's meeting. However, the public may still comment by Zoom or telephone. For those members of the public who are joining us by phone or on Zoom, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and the council will receive up to 3 comments each on both sides of each issue. If you are participating by Zoom, please click in the participants box to raise hand to be recognized. For those participating by phone, please dial *9 to be recognized to speak. In addition, if you are participating by Zoom but do not wish to speak, you are encouraged to watch the council meeting by live stream through the city's website. Thank you. City Manager, what have we got lined up?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the moment, we have the first 2 hands up are Lisa McConnell and Sydney Layardi.
Layardi?
Yes.
Ms. McConnell? Welcome, Ms. McConnell.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Sweet, council members, and City Manager Triplett. I speak to you tonight as a member of Kirkland Greenways. Kirkland Greenways is very excited about moving forward with the Lake Washington Boulevard pilot study. The Transportation Commission expressed their unanimous support at their last meeting. Juanita Neighborhood Association is also expressing their support. Kirkland Greenways started discussing and working with Feet First about the best way to collect accurate metrics and community input during the opening of the East Side's best shoreline. Kirkland Greenways already discussed with Jim Lopez the amazing opportunities for small businesses. Coordinating with Shop Local Kirkland, even the candlesticks used to demarcate this public space could be a space for